Atlantic Revolutions in a Global Context. Writing to a friend in 1772, before any of the Atlantic revolutions had occurred, the French intellectual Voltaire asked, "My dear philosopher, doesn't this appear to you to be the century of revolutions?" He was certainly on target, and not only for the European Atlantic world. From the early 18th century to the mid-19th, many parts of the world witnessed political and social upheaval, leading some historians to think in terms of a world crisis, or converging revolutions. By the 1730s, the Safavid dynasty that had ruled Persia, now Iran, for several centuries had completely collapsed, even as the powerful Mughal Empire governing India also fragmented. About the same time, the Wahhabi movement in Arabia seriously threatened the Ottoman Empire, and its religious ideals informed major political upheavals in Central Asia and elsewhere. The Russian Empire under Catherine the Great experienced a series of peasant uprisings, most notably one led by the Cossack commander Pugachev in 1773 to 1774, which briefly proclaimed the end of serfdom before that rebellion was crushed. China too in the late 18th and early 19th centuries hosted a number of popular, though unsuccessful rebellions, a prelude perhaps to the huge Taiping Revolution of 1850 to 1864. Beginning in the early 19th century, a wave of Islamic revolutions shook West Africa, while in southern Africa, a series of wars and migrations known as the Mfecane, the breaking or crushing, involved widespread and violent disruptions as well as the creation of new states and societies. Thus, the Atlantic revolutions in North America, France, Haiti, and Latin America took place within a larger global framework. Like many of the other upheavals, they too occurred in the context of expensive wars, weakening states, and destabilizing processes of commercialization. But compared to upheavals elsewhere, the Atlantic revolutions were distinctive in various ways. The costly wars that strained European imperial states, Britain, France, and Spain in particular, were global rather than regional. In the so-called 7 Years' War, between 1754 and 1763, Britain and France joined battle in North America, the Caribbean, West Africa, and South Asia. The expenses of those conflicts prompted the British to levy additional taxes on their North American colonies and the French monarchy to seek new revenue from its landowners. These actions contributed to the launching of the North American and French revolutions respectively. Furthermore, the Atlantic revolutions were distinctive in that they were closely connected to one another. The American revolutionary leader Thomas Jefferson was the U.S. ambassador to France on the eve of the French Revolution. While there, he provided advice and encouragement to French reformers and revolutionaries. Simón Bolívar, a leading figure in Spanish-American struggles for independence, twice visited Haiti, where he received military aid from the first black government in the Americas. Beyond such direct connections, the various Atlantic revolutionaries shared a set of common ideas. The Atlantic Basin had become a world of intellectual and cultural exchange, as well as one of commercial and biological interaction. The ideas that animated the Atlantic revolutions derived from the European Enlightenment and were shared across the ocean in newspapers, books, and pamphlets. At the heart of these ideas was the radical notion that human political and social arrangements could be engineered and improved by human action. Thus, conventional and long-established ways of living and thinking, the divine right of kings, state control of trade, aristocratic privilege, the authority of a single church, were no longer sacrosanct and came under repeated attack. New ideas of liberty, equality, free trade, religious tolerance, republicanism, and human rationality were in the air. Politically, the core notion was popular sovereignty, which meant that the authority to govern derived from the people rather than from God or from established tradition. As the Englishman John Locke had argued, the social contract between ruler and ruled should last only as long as it served the people well. In short, it was both possible and desirable to start over in the construction of human communities. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, these ideas were largely limited to the Atlantic world. While all of the Atlantic revolutions involved the elimination of monarchs, at least temporarily, across Asia and the Middle East, such republican political systems were virtually inconceivable until much later. There, the only solution to a bad monarch was a new and better one. In the world of the Atlantic revolutions, ideas born of the Enlightenment generated endless controversy. Were liberty and equality compatible? What kind of government, unitary and centralized or federal and decentralized, best ensured freedom? And how far should liberty be extended? Except in Haiti, the chief beneficiaries of these revolutions were propertied white men of the middling classes. Although women, slaves, Native Americans, and men without property did not gain much from these revolutions, the ideas that accompanied those upheavals gave them ammunition for the future. Because their overall thrust was to extend political rights further than ever before, these Atlantic movements have often been referred to as democratic revolutions. A final distinctive feature of the Atlantic revolutions lies in their immense global impact, extending well beyond the Atlantic world. The armies of revolutionary France, for example, invaded Egypt, Germany, Poland, and Russia, carrying seeds of change. The ideals that animated these Atlantic revolutions inspired efforts in many countries to abolish slavery, to extend the right to vote, to develop constitutions, and to secure greater equality for women. Nationalism, perhaps the most potent ideology of the modern era, was nurtured in the Atlantic revolutions and shaped much of 19th and 20th century world history. The ideas of human equality articulated in these revolutions later found expression in feminist, socialist, and communist movements. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, echoed and amplified those principles while providing the basis for any number of subsequent protests against oppression, tyranny, and deprivation. In 1989, a number of Chinese students, fleeing the suppression of a democracy movement in their own country, marched at the head of a huge parade in Paris, celebrating the bicentennial of the French Revolution. And in 2011, the Middle Eastern uprisings known as the Arab Spring initially prompted numerous comparisons with the French Revolution. The Atlantic revolutions had a long reach.